All right, guys, I just want to welcome back to Everything College Football Podcast. Today, I'll be doing my preview and prediction for top 15 SEC matchup going down in Baton Rouge. LSU hosting Ole Miss. 2.5-point favorites are the Rebels. 64.5 is the total. 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC. Getting things started with the Ole Miss offense. This is a unit putting up 44 points per game. I mean, they really teed off over the first 4 weeks against some pretty woeful opponents. Enter conference play. Got upset at home against Kentucky, only put up 27. Turn around the next week and play South Carolina, where they put up 27. A more admirable performance from this unit. And obviously, the offensive line is a big topic of concern, and that's what it was, coming into this year, was how will this O-line do, even with some additions in the portal. And, we've gotten our answer so far against 2 elite defensive lines. The Wildcats really had a day with them. South Carolina, pretty much, they're better in pass protection. They also pretty much had a good day as well, kind of, held this passing attack in check. It was hard for them to spring too many big plays, as Dart was, having to use a lot of, mobility to escape. Diego Pounds at left tackle did not have a very good game. Nate Kalepo at left guard, and he was one of the additions they got from Washington. And then the other one was Julius Buelow at right guard. And obviously the Huskies last year had a phenomenal O-line, but, these 2 guys at guard were the weakest links for Washington, quite frankly, and they've been, as good as I guess expected in SEC play so far. At center, Reese McIntyre, he's been all right as well as a pass blocker, even though he has given up a couple of sacks. And then at right tackle, Micah Pettis, he's the best lineman they have. He's a returnee from last couple of seasons, so he's played a lot of football here for Ole Miss. But so far, this offensive line's just not passed the test. And obviously, LSU, they have a good D line. They don't have an elite one, kind of like the last 2 opponents that they've seen. Being held to 353 yards or less the last 2 weeks isn't ideal. The elite D line's really phased them. And I think here against LSU, it's going to be a bit of an easier matchup. Pass pro has been real shaky. I thought it was better in the first half against South Carolina. Not as great the rest of the game. Pretty stagnant offensive line here, though. I think the biggest thing to do here is just attack the boundary often. LSU struggles against the run on the boundary. They have versatility with the running backs, and of course Jackson Dart is a very good runner with his legs. Henry Parrish, 570 and 9 touchdowns this year. Matt Jones, the running back, too. Coming into the season, they had an immense amount of depth. Guys like USC's Bentley, Rashad Amos, and you've just not seen those guys really get involved. It's really been the Parrish show, and then Jones, you have 222 yards. This is still a slashing, rushing attack. They like to move fast with a lot of pace. Last year in this matchup, they had a field day against a very poor LSU defense. We had 300-plus rushing, also had 300-plus passing. So, and this defense might be, just as bad, if, not worse than last year, especially with no Harold Perkins. So, I think they want to attack that, see if they can, try, test those offensive ends, try to stretch it out, keep contained, see if the linebackers can show athletic ability without Perkins. I think this run game will probably have a pretty solid day for Ole Miss, but that's how this offense starts. And if they're not running the ball well, which they haven't exactly done the last 2 games, it was, pretty solid against South Carolina with, 140 yards, 3 scores, but less than 100 and only 1 TD against Kentucky. It's not where they want to be. When this run game's clicking, 200, 250 yards, they are incredibly tough to slow down. Now you move to the Ole Miss passing attack. Dart, he's having a great year. 3rd season in Lane Kiffin's system, 2,000 yards passing, 13 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, does have 156 rushing and another 3 scores. Passing attack last couple weeks, though, some of the worst numbers they're looking at, in terms of yardage and completion percentage. Obviously, you're going to see, a bit of a dive when it comes to playing a bump up in competition. Only 185 and 52%, though, for Dart against South Carolina. Again, just kind of being forced out of the pocket a lot, trying to make plays. And it certainly was an issue for them. And now that they're playing against a defensive line that is maybe a tad bit weaker, they should be able to, have more opportunities to throw the football, especially against the secondary that just isn't really all that great. I think they're going to get things started with the run game. They're going to be able to open up the pass as well. Dart is a very accurate quarterback, 6'2", 225, has ideal size, can really rip it downfield. This is a player that's really shown some elite flashes, but against the tougher opponents, not as much. But he was, on one in this game a season ago. Gets started with Trey Harris, the only guy on the team with over 20 receptions, because he's just been that good. 52 grabs for 885 and 5 scores. Juice Wells, 17 for 370 and 4 touchdowns. Caden Lee, just shy of 300 yards. Jordan Watkins hasn't been involved as much this year. And Caden Prezicorn at tight end, a very good player for them. So, they have plenty of different options here. And Watkins is coming off, season highs, 5 receptions and, just shy of his high yardage total of 72 against SC. So these are guys that haven't all been productive this year, but it is an incredibly deep room. with a lot of versatility. In the 96 yards, 4 wells was a season high for him. So, I mean, they have a lot of different guys here. It's not just Trey Harris, who's having a tremendous Blitnikoff Award type season, put up almost 150 yards per game. There's a lot of depth here. You just haven't seen the production come full circle yet. But I think as the season goes on, you'll start to see these guys really ramp up the numbers, and I think this will be a great opportunity to have a couple of different guys, approach the 100-yard total. So this is an Ole Miss offense that, Lane Kiffin obviously is known for his units, but against the tougher opponents this year especially, it's kind of been lackluster. It hasn't been all that creative. It's kind of the same stuff. It just seems like they lack innovation at times. In this matchup, it won't be too much of a concern. I think they should have 400 or 500 yards of ease. They will have that ideal balance. Will it be enough to get a victory? As we move on to the other units, we'll see. Overall, good unit, though. Love what Ole Miss has here, even though the offensive line is certainly a tad iffy at times. Moving to the LSU offense, the quarterback on the other side is just as good. Garrett Nussmeier, a legit gunslinger, a guy that has NFL arm talent, 70% completion rating, 1,600 yards, 15 touchdowns and 4 picks this season. Last time out against South Alabama, he put up a season-high 409. The game against South Carolina a couple weeks back, he really had to will them to victory. So they were trailing a good bit in that contest. Did have a bad interception, though, in that game against SC in the end zone. Had 2 more against South Alabama. So turnovers maybe something starting to kind of creep in with his game a little bit. I don't think it's all that bad, though. Nussmeier's still a guy that's going to uncork a lot of good throws, a legit heat on him. You look at the receiving group. Kyron Lacey had a great start to the year. He has, against SC and Nicholls State, then against South Carolina as well. He has 5 touchdowns this year, 352. Is coming off a season high with 107 against South Alabama on top of 25 receptions. Lacey's a phenomenal player out wide. And Aaron Anderson, the 5-star transfer from Alabama. This is a guy that is very good. Coming back to the New Orleans area where he's from, 5'8", 187. Leading the team with 371 yards on 27 receptions and a pair of touchdowns. Really love what he brings to the table, and I thought coming into this season he would have a pretty, good breakout season because they're a little thin at wide receiver, I'd say. It seemed like the opportunity for him this year would be exponential, and he's been splendid for them out of the slot. You look at Mason Taylor, a guy who is a very good tight end, plays the game the right way. 6'5", 255. Love the size and the ability he brings to the table. 280 yards on 28 receptions. Not really that much of a red zone threat. He only has 1 touchdown this year. He doesn't really have an abundance of touchdowns. Only had 1 a season ago. But this is a guy who's available at the sticks. You can find him underneath, and he's going to be able to usually pick up a first down. And he's picking up, exactly 10 yards per catch. So that's his role, and he plays it very well. And then C.J. Daniels also has 20 receptions. Xavier Thomas, one of their explosive playmakers, has 135, total yards, or more than that, over 200 total yards between, returning punts, rushing, and then receiving. 2 scores for him on top of 100 yards. He's, their explosive guy they'll get the ball to on occasion. Still very good wide receiver room, even though it doesn't exactly have a high-end talent, even though Lacey's kind of trending in that direction. This is a very good room. They got plenty of different guys they can spread the football out to and be confident in. Coming into the season, the LSU rushing attack was something we were certainly worried about because they just didn't seem to have that much depth at running back compared to last year. They had an abundance of it. No John Emery available. Caleb Jackson, seemed like he was going to be the lead back. Hasn't really taken the reins of that. Josh Williams is a power runner with 3 scores. It's been the Caden Durham show. 234 and 3 touchdowns. The game against South Carolina, he burst onto the scene. Some very hard running. 98 yards and 2 scores. Then he put up a season high, $128, and another score against South Alabama. So this is the guy who looks like he's going to be the RB1 as a true freshman, a guy who's been very versatile because he's also got 130 yards receiving on top of 2 touchdowns, 89 of those, and a score came against USA. So, this is a guy that, just in the recent game, even though it was kind of a woeful opponent, really was able to light them up. This is going to be the RB1 moving forward. Very impressive player at 5'9", 205. And the true freshman Durham. And the good news is he has a phenomenal offensive line. He's running behind. They haven't been all that ideal in run blocking, but in terms of pass protection, they are one of the best in the country. And starts at left tackle. Will Campbell hasn't had the best of season. He hasn't been, complete, bookend like we expect. He's still an elite player, right? But he's had, a couple of penalties, allowed some pressures. Still a phenomenal player. He's going to go first round next year. Garrett Dellinger, on the other hand, is having a phenomenal mistake-free type of season at left guard. DJ Chester, he's having some struggles in his first year. It's a 5-star starting center for the Tigers. Miles Frazier, he's been a phenomenal pass blocker at right guard and then right tackle. Emory Jones also kind of having some issues in terms of pass protection, but this is still, I think, the nation's best offensive line. They've certainly proved it. in their pass protection abilities. This is a phenomenal D-line they're going up against, though, so they're going to have plenty of opportunities here to flex their muscle. This is a great lineup, great offense top to bottom. Even though they're kind of one-dimensional, I think the run game can be good enough and provide enough, consistency, and they can be admirable enough. And even if they are one-dimensional, they have no issues throwing the heck out of the rock with Nussmeier. Now you move to the Ole Miss defense. This is the team that also made a abundance of transfer additions, much like the O-line, and they've been a bit shaky. But on the other hand, the D-line has not been at all. I mean, this is a phenomenal unit, first nationally in tackles for loss with 63. They've been very impressive. 3 straight games of double-figure TFL. That includes 2 SEC opponents, and then Georgia Southern, of course. And, they teed off early on in the year against an FCS opponent. So maybe, tad bit skewed numbers, but again, they've put up a combined 20 against SEC teams so far, and everybody's getting involved. This is a D-line that I had a lot of praise for coming into the year. So far, they're living up to the expectation. Walter Nolan, the big-time addition from A&M, has been an elite run stopper. Same goes for J.J. Pegues. Jared Ivey is a tremendous player. Those 2 guys were returnees from last year's team. Princely Unamanellan was another addition they had from Florida. This is a very good D-line. Xavier Harris and Jamarius Brown. I mean, they all of a sudden have size and depth and a lot of talent from this D-line. They're all producing. Ivy has 5 sacks. Unamanellan has 3.5. 24 total as a team. I mean, this is a very good defensive line, even if they've maybe teed off on some weaker opponents. I don't think they're a fluke one bit. And obviously, I could be eating my words playing this LSU offensive line, but I think this is a game they can certainly have a lot of success in, especially against the run. Maybe not so much in terms of pass rushing. I think there's going to be opportunities for them to create, though. So we'll see what they do. I mean, you really only need about, maybe 1 or 2 sacks, honestly, in this game, because it's going to come down to just a handful of stops, most likely. I mean, that's what we saw last year. Very good D-line, though. This is a very good run defense. I don't think they're a joke one bit. I think that the size is legit. I think the talent is also, for real. I mean, they're number 1 in run defense right now nationally. So, I mean, this is a very good D-line. You move to the middle of their defense. They're also getting a lot out of these guys. Chris Paul, the Arkansas transfer, leading this team in pretty much all categories. 41 TFL, or 41 tackles, that is, 7 of those coming for a loss, has 2 pass breakups, 7 QB hurries on top of 2.5 sacks. Chris Paul's playing tremendous. While on the other hand, the former 5-star Suntarine Perkins, he's having a good year in his own right. 25 tackles, 6.5 TFL, 4.5 sacks, and he also has an interception. He's done a great job the last couple weeks as a QB spy. And that's something that you probably won't have to do too much against Nussmeier. He has, all right mobility, but nothing's really going to shock you too much. I think this is a guy who has a lot of athletic ability, though, and he's a very good pass rusher. That's something I think they need to continue to use him as. And that's something I felt they should do coming into this season. I thought he had that type of versatility, and so far he's showcasing that he does. And then TJ Daugherty, a guy who was showcasing some versatility, kind of came out of nowhere, wasn't really on my projected depth chart coming into the year. He's playing very sound. So, I mean, the Ole Miss front 7, I mean, this is a very good unit. I don't think it's a fluke at all. But this is a big matchup here. This is one of the biggest ones you're going to face all season in terms of this O-line. You face Georgia later down the road, but I think this will be a great tone-setting matchup for the Ole Miss defense. If they can come in here and prove that they are legit, and they're going to have an opportunity to do so. Now you look at the Ole Miss secondary. Trey Amos, the Alabama transfer, is having a really good year. The other guys, Isaiah Hamilton, Brandon Turnage, I'm not as confident in their abilities, even though I do think that Amos has been a really good playmaker for them. I just think with 2 interceptions, I think the pass defense might struggle in this game. They haven't really done too much this season. The opponents they face not all that great. I mean, a lot of them have been playing from behind, so the numbers aren't even really something you can look at. Kentucky, they did have a pretty solid game through the air. It was only about 240, for a touchdown, so nothing too major. This team hasn't been hurt too bad. But at corner, I definitely think these receivers will have an advantage. John Saunders, a versatile safety. Him and his co-part are very good. Trey Washington, that is, especially against the run. In terms of tackling, these guys were like that last year. They're pretty good in coverage as well. But they can't do everything, so they're going to need help from their corners. Jaden Cannati, a guy who has played a lot of slot for them this year, has struggled, hasn't been all that great. But the safeties are great. The corners, certainly worry about. I think this is a game where they're probably going to struggle to contain the pass, especially if their own pass rush can't teeth some things up. But I think they have enough versatility to create enough pressure that will certainly allow them to get off the field. Ian Banks, another guy who's getting on the field a good bit. He's been really splendid for them. Another safety, though. So the corners, they got to show up in this game. They got to play good football. That's something I'm not fully convinced they can do yet, outside of Amos. But this will be a great opportunity to prove a lot of stuff for this Ole Miss defense and to show that they're legit and they're not a walkover. Now you look at the LSU defense unit that, really hasn't showcased too many more improvements from last year. I wouldn't say at this moment in time. Against USC, they gave almost 400 passing. Against South Carolina game, they did relatively well in most of the rushing yards they gave up, 243 of them to be exact, were off of big plays. And this year they've allowed 3 plays of 60-plus rushing. That's one of the worst marks in the country. Had a great game against UCLA. Phenomenal against South Alabama, even though the pass defense against the Bruins wasn't all that great, and they're giving up some big plays. This is a defense that certainly might be in for a rough game, and I alluded to earlier how they have a good D-line, but maybe not an elite one. I think Braden Swinson is a phenomenal pass rusher, though. He's going to have opportunities to really flip this game on its heels if they can create opportunities for him to maybe force fumbles off the edge, come up with big negative sacks. Savion Jones, the other D-end. I love those guys. I think they're phenomenal. It's a nice little duo. The rest of the unit, maybe not as much. Paris Shand, he's, a veteran, hasn't done all that much. The interior D-line was a bit of a concern coming into the year, and so far, it's kind of iffy. Gio Paz, one of their transfers, pretty good player for them. Javier Suggs, he's played a solid amount of snaps. It's really just been a kind of an interesting rotation here on the interior. Ahmad Brooks, he's probably been their best interior D-line, but there's no real game changers here, and depth isn't all that great, and that's going to be a concern. This is a team that likes to move a lot of pace, a lot of tempo, especially if they're running the ball well, and they've really struggled on the boundary. That's that's something Rocket Sanders for South Carolina did. A guy who's a bigger back, not full of speed. He housed, I think it was a 70-yarder on him. It's just they've not been great, especially on the boundary. Now that Harold Perkins is out for the year, that's a big lack of athleticism now at the linebacking group. I still think they have good players. They're built to handle this well. I would say with Whit Weeks, Greg Penn, West Weeks as well. There's some solid players here, but the lack of athletic ability is going to be major for them because again they've already struggled in terms of giving up big plays to the boundary. So how they can replace that? Likely these DBs to step up in terms of tackling. That's something Major Burns is certainly capable of. Sage Ryan as well. Added responsibility for those guys. Though, you look at the secondary for LSU, it's been good so far other than the UCLA and the USC games. The teams from Cali have really given them some issues. Other than that, they've started to come through, but not fully. They're still giving up a 66% this year. Only have 2 interceptions. They kind of were able to tee off on a weak South Carolina passing attack to kind of get their numbers lower. But I guess it's been fair, but it's not been that great. I'm not all that confident in it. I just don't think that's as talented of a bunch. Ashton Stamps, he's given up 200-plus yards this year in coverage. J.K. Johnson hasn't been much better. Zy Alexander, they're glad to have him back in the lineup. He's probably their best corner. But other than that, who are you going to turn to? I think these safeties that I just alluded to, those are some good guys in terms of tackling. Maybe not so much in terms of coverage, though, especially with Burns, playing a lot in the slot. He's been, iffy in that role. He's been targeted a good bit, and he's been, allowing a good bit of completions as well. So this is not a secondary I'm all that confident in. Just they've not really, improved all that well. Deshaun Spears, Jaden Gilbert, that safety spot, it's been a bit of an issue for them. Sage Ryan, though, he is, probably their best go-to guy there. It's kind of a makeshift secondary, quite frankly, and there's just not a lot of development here at the moment. I think in terms of tackling, they're probably going to struggle, which is not great because you need someone to replace those lanes that would be typically filled by Perkins, just getting in the way of his athletic ability and tracking down plays. So secondary here, probably going to get torched in this matchup, but they can slow down the run. And this offensive line can be put on their heels, and you'll have a good opportunity to create, especially if they're second and third and long. So secondary, I'm not all that confident in, but the other part of the defense, and that's going to be the way they can win this game. Looking at the tail of the tape, the team comparisons. Quarterback, you're going to call it even. Dalton and Nussmeier are both phenomenal. I can't really pick which one is probably better. Who would I trust in a matchup that they had to win? I would probably trust Nussmeier, quite frankly, but Dart is a dual-threat guy who did torch this team last year. At running back, I got to give it to Ole Miss, even though it seems like LSU's starting to make some marches forward with Caden Durham at the helm. I think wide receivers also even. Probably a few more guys for the Rebels. And Trey Harris is probably the best. He is the best receiver in this game, but I don't want to underrate LSU. I think it's still a good receiving group. O-line, clear edge there. And then all the defensive spots, I think Ole Miss going to clear them there. Looking at the final thoughts and the prediction, keys of the game for Ole Miss, balanced and pace hurt LSU's defense bad last year, and it's going to be the same approach in this contest versus a team that's probably relatively the same, if not worse, on defense. And for the Tigers, they can still burn you, even as a one-dimensional offense. I alluded to that earlier. Even if they have no run game, Nussmeier can throttle you. So as long as the pass pro stays stout, he's probably going to cook. And I think both secondaries will likely struggle in this game. I think it's a high-scoring affair, much like last year, a bit of a shootout, 45-40 for Ole Miss. I think going on the road is the best thing that LSU has for them. This one's in Baton Rouge. I just think the Ole Miss offense will be too good in this contest. They've struggled the last couple weeks with some good defensive lines. I think here, this is going to be an opportunity for them to get back to their bread and butter of running the football, and they're going to spark big, explosive plays. They're tough to slow down when they can do that. So this will be an interesting game. It's obviously a big one in the SEC. Both teams already have one loss, so in terms of playoff picture, it's going to be hard. They can still bounce back with the remaining schedules, but this is pretty much a must-win. Every game's a must-win, even early October, especially with the SEC looking kind of gloomy nowadays after some major upsets, so not much can be given in games like this. You got to be able to win them, and I think Ole Miss will be the one that come out victors in this contest. High-scoring affair. Lane Kiffin's team getting the job done, though. That's it for today's episode. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.